Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. Today I am very excited because I'm bringing back the one and only Ronnie Pontiac, and he is going to talk to us about Jupiter and Gemini. So if this is content that you're interested, please stick around. Ronnie is a complete Renaissance man, and he is an astrologer who's been studying for decades, and he studied under a very famous astrologer and mystic named Manly P. Hall. So you may know him from his work with Manly. And so very excited to have him back on the channel. So stick around and see what he has to say about Jupiter and Gemini. So Ronnie, welcome.
I'm very happy to be back. Thanks for having me, Dabney.
Yeah, did I say all around nice guy? I can't remember. He's also an all around nice guy as far as I can tell.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence.
Yes. So, yeah, it's very kind of you to join me. So, do you want to start out just talking a little bit about Jupiter and Gemini and just sort of set the stage a little bit, explaining that, this is a 1 year cycle or 13-month cycle, just kind of give people a little bit of an understanding what that even means, Jupiter and Gemini.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to remind everyone that the one placement, like Jupiter being in Gemini, by itself can bring us certain understanding or awareness of opportunities or challenges that it may be signifying, but that we have to look at the bigger picture as well of Pluto retrograde in Aquarius and Neptune in retrospective Pisces and Uranus getting ready to join Jupiter in Gemini in not too long, and still sojourning through Taurus, and and those may be dominant. So, in other words, if somebody is very wrapped up in the Platonian issues of the times and the suffering and tragedies and potential disasters are constantly on their mind and they're doom scrolling, they will probably miss the good opportunities of Jupiter in Gemini. It's easy to fixate on one of these stronger planetary placements and the aspects related to it sometimes, especially as we're drawing out of this Pluto in Capricorn malaise of depression and pessimism, and this feeling that if you don't have a doom-filled view of the future, then you're not facing facts. Jupiter and Gemini is not going to coexist very well with that kind of an attitude. But it does represent a little bit over a year of some real opportunities. And I hope to today look at some of the positive things that we might expect or we might want to focus on, also some of the negative aspects of it. And we'll talk about the fact that it's in detriment for a little bit, and also see what Ficino thought about this particular placement. And we'll explain who he was for those who don't know. And then we'll look at a piece of history, actually two of them, the last two times that Jupiter was in Gemini. And so each of us can look at our own lives and look at that period of time and see what themes came up for us. And we'll also look at what happened historically. It's pretty interesting.
So one of the things that I saw this week was a headline that said, this was, kind of one of the headlines that stuck out at me was, is the US finally coming out of its nosedive? And I loved that because it really was like, okay, I feel like Jupiter entering Gemini is the first piece of all of these outer planets, or the slower moving planets, starting to kind of click into a new sign. So it's almost like we have been in this nosedive, and like maybe we're just starting to pull the tip up. So that was kind of the positive thing that went through my head when I saw that with Jupiter and Gemini.
I saw a piece of news that I thought, I'm not sure it has much value in terms of inspiration, but it just was the perfect symbol to me of Jupiter and Gemini. Apparently, South Korea for some time has been using balloons to dump flyers with propaganda against the North Korean government into North Korea. And not too long ago, North Korea took to using balloons to drop giant bags of trash into South Korea. And they explained that this was so that the South Koreans could understand what it feels like to have a bunch of garbage thrown over the border, and then a bunch of people have to work together to clean up the mess.
Interesting.
And I just thought, here's Jupiter and Gemini, twins, right? Two countries of Koreans.
Yep.
They're shadows of each other in a sense. And here they are exchanging these balloons of insult.
Right.
And so this is the dysfunctional symbol to me for Jupiter and Gemini. And when we talk about the shadow side of it, I think that will come back to mind.
I love that. Okay. All right. So let's talk about Jupiter in general. What is Jupiter? What does it symbolize? How can people think of it metaphorically?
Ficino, who was the father of the Renaissance in many ways, and really an amazing influence on Western esotericism. He was a huge influence on Agrippa, for example, and Agrippa, of course, was an influence on almost everyone. And Ficino was also a very dedicated astrologer and had studied deeply in Plato and the Neoplatonists and knew a lot of ancient astrology. And his belief was that Jupiter represents the law that keeps daily order, that keeps a society civilized. So this could relate to Zeus and Jupiter having the law of hospitality, which was that if a stranger came to you, you had to treat them with a hospitable mercy and grace. And that was very important for civilization at a time when before that there was no reason to do anything but kill them and take their stuff. And so the this Jupiter represents what kind of it's courts, it's religion. It can represent institutions, although not in the Saturnian way, more in the sense of people coming together to create an order that is beneficial to as many of them as possible. And in our own charts, Jupiter, of course, represents opportunities for success. It shows us in what direction that success might go and what we might be good at, and what sorts of activities, when Jupiter is in a certain placement, are favored. So with Jupiter in Gemini, we have a very mercurial Jupiter. And some of the positive aspects of it, and I think all of this is very timely, and some of it is going to be hard to believe for people that there will be this kind of thing during Jupiter and Gemini, but it's highly likely that during the next year we will be seeing these themes in society. So one of the characteristic themes of Jupiter and Gemini is a love of philosophy, history, ideas, travel. There's this enthusiasm for understanding the world, and there's this feeling of a beneficent view of the world, and we expect the world to have a similar reaction to us, and so we study these subjects in order to become wiser and to live better lives and to make better choices. And Jupiter in Gemini favors this. Now, obviously, a lot of people are currently engaged in this kind of activity. And we know that Pluto in Aquarius favors similar kinds of activities. And so I think that this is highly favorable for reading and writing and publishing about the esoteric, but about all history of ideas. And this also relates to laws that preserve daily order. So we're already seeing a conflict because with Gemini, we can see these two sides, as we'll see when we look at the shadow, where we take two different sides of opinion on something and never shall the twain meet. And so there are those who believe that the laws must be changed in order to preserve what they consider daily order. So it was very important to a whole bunch of people, and most of them, I suspect, men, that women lose their right to choice. And as we know, there are plans afoot politically that have been going on for a long time in the public eye to maybe even turn back, time more and make divorce illegal again, or make it more difficult to get any kind of contraception. And so the conservative side is always testing the limits of their power, just as the progressive side is. And therefore, people are looking and saying the laws don't work, or we need new laws, or this particular law needs to go. And this kind of debate will continue strongly this year, of course, going into the election and immediately after it and on into summer of 2025, as collectively we decide what these laws that preserve daily order should look like. Are we going to fall into the old, if the trains run on time, I don't care if they're fascists, or are we going to try to truly create a more functional order based on all the new technology at our disposal and create an easier life for everyone? So
So I
that
love
did,
that. What's interesting, I don't mean to cut you off.
no, not at all.
Uh, do you remember that story around 2015 about the dress that some people saw as black and blue and some people saw it as gold and white? And I feel like that dress was very symbolic of the past several years that we've been living in, where people can only see it from their perspective. And so Jupiter and Gemini, it's kind of this interesting duality where here we are, I feel like we're closing out and we're going to be coming to a place where there's going to be action. And I think Jupiter and Gemini is challenging us to say, like, is there a way we can see it from both sides? Can we see blue and black and gold and white? Is there an opportunity for curiosity to see that there are two different sides here and maybe they're not all right or all wrong?
Yeah, I would hope so. And certainly this gives us a window here of some favorable time for improved quality of conversation, which is another Jupiter and Gemini quality. So you're going to be debating, but the quality of the debate improves significantly with this placement. And and now, the next stop for Jupiter is Cancer. And could this be a kumbaya moment where everybody kind of comes back to love the country? And I don't know.
There's
I
a lot of
I
other things going on, right?
Yeah,
So
and
we'll see.
it usually with Cancer we get a retreat to family and home and waving the flag and such. So it is possible that what happens now is the two sides polarize themselves even more than they already are in this duality that's afflicting the country. But there's no question that even if that's the case, there will be a burgeoning minority of people, there already are, who are seeking that union, who understand that this idea that there has to be just unilateral rejection of those who disagree with us is not possible.
I don't think it's a
And
minority. I think that those of us, I think people are in the majority that do want to come back, but I think the loudest voices that are getting the attention are definitely on the polar opposites for sure.
there's a whole lot of very cranky people out there. A
Maybe I'm
lot
being
of
too optimistic.
but I agree with you. There also, I mean, the thing is, there's millions in all these different parties. So even if I say that it's a minority, it's still millions.
And a lot of people aren't even paying attention. I mean, that's
Yes, of
what's
course. And that's the
shocking
bit
too.
most significant, right? Because that, and we'll talk about that because that is part of the shadow here. But we have something like over 30%, or somewhere between 30 and 40% of Americans who can't really find the will to vote because they either just have given up on the process, or they never cared at all, or they don't like the candidates, and who can blame them? And so you have this situation where there's an inertia that can happen. And this is also part of the Jupiter and Gemini problem. So we will talk about that. But this improved quality of conversation would be very welcome and helpful. And hopefully we'll be seeing more people crossing the line and talking to people who disagree with them. That's highly favored right now. So people who are doing that are going to experience success. And we'll be seeing, I believe, more of it in the public eye. And it makes sense if you look at it astrologically, that by next summer we get to switch into Cancer, and that's really the settling in of whatever the next presidency is, right? And people settling into their own comforting belief systems and ways of life for that year. And so either way it goes, I think, we'll probably be seeing the dialogues that happen now and help to define the election will bring about whatever this next phase looks like that we have to settle down in and make our homes.
Yeah, our new reality right now is the opportunity to kind of, things are starting to lock in for what the new reality will look like for, decades ahead. And so that is what we do now, and the choices we make, I think, are so important.
Yeah, absolutely, collectively and individually.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So see, here are some things that are favored to keep an eye out for, to try to emphasize. Successful partnerships, but only where there is equality, because if there is the effort to manipulate or one partner seizes the initiative, if it isn't amenable, these kinds of partnerships can be very destructive because there's more energy spent on fighting than there is on getting things done. But when they're done in a fair way and the chemistry is good, this is a highly favorable placement for partnerships. And intellectual curiosity is another characteristic that is very favored now. So you want to indulge your intellectual curiosity. And with Jupiter in Gemini, it's okay to be like a butterfly and flit from one flower to the other and just let your curiosity guide you and have adventures with videos or bookshelves or wherever you get your information, and let those, sometimes that happens in the most astounding way, where you're after some information and it leads you to something else, it leads you to something else, and it turns out to be highly synchronistic and important at that moment in your life. So this is a good year for those kinds of adventures. It requires being open-minded. So open-mindedness is really a big key to not just unlocking success and joy this year, but also to understanding what is required of us in a sense. And so if you look at politics today and the division we're talking about, open-mindedness is what is lacking. There's this false certainty that afflicts so much of our politics, but also of our spiritual paths and religions. There is a kind of gravity, it's a draw to people, and there's that false certainty. When somebody says, I know it's like this, and this is exactly what happened, and back in Atlantis or whatever you're talking about, and they have this great certainty and all the facts at their disposal, many people are drawn to that. And they feel like, wow, they really know what they're talking about. But the truth is, and this is also very Jupiter and Gemini, that there is no greater wisdom than doubt and paradox. That being able to hold both sides of a question, being able to deal with suspense and doubt and not rush to have some kind of an answer that makes us feel more comfortable, is part of what cultivating an enlightened mind is all about. And so an open mind, I like to use, there's this wonderful term in Buddhism called sky-like mind. And really the idea of nothingness is mistranslated that way. It really means sky-like mind. And so to have this openness to the world, to take in all the opportunities and all the disagreements and all the paradoxes and remain with them and look at them and look at all the different sides of them and learn. This is what Jupiter and Gemini is all about.
Yeah, so just kind of to sum up, curiosity, synchronicity, I love that. I mean, Jupiter and Gemini is synchronistic, and the more you can kind of lean into those synchronicities on a personal level, I think the more the people will thrive. Like you said, open-mindedness and embracing ambiguity and the paradox. I
Yeah.
think that's all just so powerful, and I think that's exactly where people are at.
I think a good symbol for it is Manly Hall, who you mentioned, used to call himself a rogue scholar. And what he meant by that was that he didn't have any degrees, he was self-taught, and he was passionate, enthusiastic about his subjects. And so he created all of this work and became a polyglot and self-taught genius. And so he may not have been right about every single thing, but he he was a scholar that you can still turn to and find inspiration and useful facts. And so this idea of rogue scholars, right, is very Jupiter and Gemini, because you're not doing, I'm going to be a philosopher, Jupiter. I'm going to be a religious teacher. I'm going to be somebody who is bringing the law of hospitality at the highest levels into society in some way. So I should go to school, right? I should get my degrees. I should have a PhD. I should teach within the established system. That's not Jupiter and Gemini. Jupiter and Gemini doesn't want all that structure and spend this many years studying that language so I can later study this. Jupiter and Gemini wants to go where the breeze is going, wants to follow the whim of the moment, and can learn in spectacular ways by doing just that. And that's the rogue scholar, the amateurs who kept the esoteric world alive for many decades while it was completely ignored by academia and mainstream authors, and who include people like Blavatsky and of course Manly Hall and so many others, Rudolf Steiner, and on and on. And these were not people who were considered academically sound scholars who have been properly trained, but their passionate scholarship has been of great value to humanity. So they are favored with Jupiter and Gemini. And you might check out the work of some of them if you've ever been curious about that kind of thing.
So talk to us a little bit more about, or talk to us now about the shadow side or the detriment piece of it.
Okay. This, I think, relates to, now let's go back to Korea, and we've got the two shadows, right? They're twins, but they're shadows. They're Korean, but they go about everything in opposite ways, and they totally demonize each other, and they blame each other for every single problem that exists between them. And this is the negative side. So Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. And detriment means it's not comfortable there. It doesn't function well there. And this is a planet that rules Sagittarius, and Gemini is the opposite of Sagittarius, so it's not surprising. But again, you would expect that there would be some kind of a communion in that opposition, in that polarity. So the reason that people say it's in detriment in part is because Mercury can too easily be overwhelmed by Jupiter. And so thinking can go awry. You can be way too enthusiastic about something and way off on it. You can bowl people over with your enthusiasm about things. You can talk over people. You can really kind of lose track of the give and take of true communication. You can lose track of the details. You can see the big picture and think, my God, this is brilliant. We'll all be rich in a matter of months. And you don't understand how many details and steps there are between that beautiful goal and this opportunity that just reared its head in your world. So it's important to pay attention to details. But as far as that detriment, Ficino, who had this great saying that's very well worth meditating on for astrologers and people who like astrology, he said, the stars are adverse only to those who have perverse minds. So what he meant was that there is no aspect, no matter how negative, that is not there to teach us. Every single aspect, from his point of view, was and is a gift of divine grace. And so even when we face horrendous aspects, they are there to teach us and to test us and to give us experiences that are necessary for us to continue evolving. And so when you look at it that way, rather than looking back into history and then finding, and I mean, I've done this myself, with plagues on the way with Pluto and Capricorn. But instead of looking at it from that point of view, Ficino was looking at it trying to say, if only we could all lift our minds in how we view the world and expected the best and made choices to have the best, we wouldn't have to live in a world where those kinds of things happen. And he felt that Jupiter and Mercury work very well together. because they provide a civilizing discourse and an enrichment, a cultural enrichment of society. So when we make culture, Ficino said it's natural for what we make to become empty forms because what is real is always changing, right? So if you start an institution around a spiritual revelation, it doesn't take very long for it to lose touch with the evolving spiritual revelations of the community that it seeks to represent. And eventually it becomes an actual obstacle to the reality of that revelation because it's trying to preserve that revelation from the past that it was built from. And so you need Mercury, according to Ficino, to make Jupiter able to adjust and to change and to see the details that need to be constantly readjusted so that we are in the present moment and not lost in cultural artifacts that are now empty because they no longer carry any of the meaning or emotional power or spiritual power that they originally did.
I think that that's very positive to look at in our own charts as well. Every time we have these really heavy transits, when I reflect back on my life and those of some of my clients, the really heavy transits were the ones where they made the hugest breakthroughs, where things that felt really difficult, like divorce or death even, there's tremendous gifts in that, and it's how we approach it and how we kind of rebuild like phoenixes from the fire. And so I think that that's really beneficial. And just to clarify for people who are not as familiar with astrology, who may know you from some of your other work, Jupiter in Gemini is where it is in the sky right now for everybody. It may not be where Jupiter is natally for you in your chart, but there's opportunities to work with your own natal Jupiter. But then, like Ronnie's talking about, this is how we all can collectively work with this Jupiter and Gemini energy to make the world a better place. And so there's kind of the high road or the low road. And so I feel like you're giving some really good information about how we can all kind of do the work individually to raise all the consciousness of everyone around us, because otherwise we can't change our neighbor's mind if they want to put a Trump sign out. I mean, that's just, but we can take the positive actions to model curiosity for them and civil discourse.
Exactly. Let's go through some of the shadow sides of this. And
Okay.
so things to watch out for personally, individually, collectively. These are the sides of Jupiter and Gemini that could be pitfalls.
Okay.
So one is mutually beneficial disagreements. And you can see this many times in relationships. You can see this in business relationships, and you can see this in wars, such as what's going on right now in the Middle East. This is a mutually beneficial disagreement for the extremists on both sides. They justify each other's existence. And so they are surreptitiously cooperating, in a sense, to sabotage any hope of a peaceful compromise. And so we can look in our own lives at these mutually beneficial disagreements that we may have with other people, or that may be in our arena of activity, and we may find them uncomfortable to be around for good reason because they're quite toxic. So watch out for that. And what to do with it, of course, is to realize that the benefit that's being gained is at too great an expense, and the suffering that it requires is not worth the result.
And there's chaos and confusion with that as well, because people can misrepresent their position at the
Yes,
other person's position. Like you said with the
absolutely.
Middle East, there you have to embrace the ambiguity that Netanyahu and Hamas can both be terrible, and you can dislike them both tremendously without, and therein is, like you said, the mutually beneficial division. So they're both, this war, this proxy war where civilians are dying, is mutually beneficial to both Hamas and Netanyahu.
And the thing about Jupiter and Gemini is that in that you have people who need to cooperate, in order to safeguard the future for both of them. And you have a majority in both of these nations of people who want that, who want to have to be able to raise their families safely, to want to be able to participate in the world like everybody else. And you have these small groups who have seized power and who use it in order to manipulate these conflicts. And these conflicts suck in the whole world to a degree. I mean, the worst case scenario is that the war itself spreads and becomes some kind of a world war, which is possible. And the other thing is that it causes division everywhere around the world. In families at the dinner table, we see the protests in the colleges, and there's a tendency to demonize the opposing viewpoint. And so people who believe that one side is the one that's wrong, they are considered to be ignorant or deliberately hateful and cruel, and the shared humanity is forgotten. I like to recommend, there's this wonderful group, I think it's called Family Circle, of Palestinians and Israelis. They are all bereaved parents who've lost children during the conflict and before it. And they work together to create awareness that there needs to be a peaceful resolution so that everyone can go on. And if parents who had lost their children to the opposing side can sit with them, with other parents who lost their children, and they can talk and they can work together to bring peace, that's where everybody needs to be putting their focus, and to me. And that's what Jupiter and Gemini is about, is what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring that healing. They're trying to see that future and bring that ultimate law of hospitality to their part of the world. And we need to support that in our part of the world rather than deciding that, I've seen so much, for instance, in social media, you see people who are deep sixing, everyone who doesn't see it the way they do. So if you're posting about your life and you're not posting about whichever of the tragedies is the one that's really got them feeling they have to do something about it, they will drop you, even their friends and family, because how can you be having fun or being worrying about your job while this is going on? You should be doing something to stop it. It spreads the conflict. It's like this epidemic of conflict that goes around the world. And so Jupiter and Gemini gives us the ability to see past that, to see both sides of the issue, and to bring some kind of dialogue together. And so what we don't want to do, another side of the shadow here, is talking over people, right? And that's what people are basically doing by trying to cancel them, or at least in their own lives. Another way that this works in a negative way is gossip as a way of manipulating or of sabotaging. So this is something also that plays into superficial cynicism that can be very Jupiter and Gemini. So we can be more concerned with entertainment news that's in the feed, or witty, clever dismissals of people who do care about what's going on, and we can have a cynical kind of detachment, a malicious boredom, if you will. And that's something to be careful about, because it easily leads to inertia. And that inertia can be caused by superficiality, as in this case, but it can also be caused by doubt. And that's another problem, is taking both sides of issues, maybe decisions in your own life, and saying, this is true and I should do this. I should do it right now. But on the other hand, and you just can go back and forth until the time to do the thing is gone. And then another one of these shadows locks in, which is the fear of insignificance, right? And so then you feel like, I missed my opportunity. I couldn't make up my mind. What's wrong with me? I'm never going to be able to accomplish my goal. That thinking process can also be a kind of bad Jupiter and Gemini experience. There's a compulsive opposition. There's compulsive uh, control of detail, right? Like I know what's best. I need to control every single detail here and not listening to somebody else who perhaps has an important perspective on some of the details. And finally, it's this kind of willful um, argument. It reminds me of, if anybody's into Monty Python, there's this really funny sketch about you go somewhere to have an argument and you have to pay somebody, and then all the guy does is he just says, no, you did, or no, you didn't, or yes, you did. It's not a real argument. And then they argue over the fact that it's not a real argument. And this is very Gemini Jupiter to me. So those are some of the things to look out for during this year plus. And you can see that it's stuff that we're always living with, of course. But it can become very discouraging. And so I do expect that as we get closer to the election, there's going to be a whole lot of real and AI gossip and news and comments and things that are going to really make it an ugly process and will make people feel a sense of doubt and vacillation about what to do. And so this is why it's so important to focus on the essence of what Jupiter's trying to achieve, which is to civilize cultures, to create culture, to unify, to bring everyone together into a big, beautiful, majestic feeling of it is worthwhile. Human beings aren't completely worthless, and there is something to be proud about in civilization and history.
So I love what you're saying. I love that you're having, you're really laying out in very intellectual terms how we can live the higher side of Jupiter and Gemini. And I love the synchronistic part of it, because I think the astrology that is taking place right now is incredibly synchronistic. And so we look at, and I'm going to be doing a whole video on the 29-degree Pisces that's taking place right now, which, with Pluto in Aquarius, the 29 Pisces, Jupiter and Gemini, AI, fake news, there's so much discordant behavior and checking out. There's so many things that can happen. But if you really lean into the higher side of these things, there's so much potential. And so because it's really challenging to influence the collective without influencing yourself first, I think that is the most important thing people can do, is kind of figure out where these things are in your chart, how you can behave and bring the higher side of these energies into the world. Because otherwise, if we give into the fear, if we give into the chaos and the hubris of our own ideas, then we are going to be manifesting the worst outcomes at a time when there's going to be no going back. And so I really think there's so much synchronicity right now with these planets. So I'm really excited with your take, because it is much deeper and more interesting to me than a lot of the takes that are out there, including my own little warm up video. I did a, Jupiter expands things and, publishing and, but this kind of conversation to me is where astrology really can help people on a deeper level. And so I'm hopeful that a lot of people will kind of internalize what you're saying. And so the other piece I wanted to bring is that people don't talk a lot about Gemini as listening. They always talk about it as communication. And there's that duality, is you can't have good communication. You can't have talking without someone actually listening. And so that seems to be a piece that's been missing for many years that hopefully will be coming back.
I definitely think that this will catalyze us towards a little bit more, but who knows what happens when we get those placements in Aries, right, with Saturn and Neptune.
That stuff's going to be moving forward, no matter
Oh yeah,
what.
it's a whole new thing, a whole new world there. I think that, I mean, to me, Neptune is zeitgeist. So by the time we get to Neptune and Aries, it's really going to feel like this. I don't know what to call it. I don't want to be insulting to anyone, but I'm going to call it baby boomer overhang is going to kind of end in its influence, not just politically and economically, but culturally as well. And
I
I
bet
think,
you have like a million amazing things to say about Neptune going into its next phase. So I'm going to have Ricky Williams on, who's another astrologer who won the Heisman Trophy. So random. He used to be a football player. Do you
that's
know
pretty
Ricky
cool.
Williams?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he's an astrologer now, and so he's going to be coming on talking about 29 Pisces. But I would love if you're, inviting you now to talk about when it goes into Aries, because I think that you'll have some really
Sure,
interesting
thank you.
insights.
I'd
Yeah.
love to. I'd like to look at the history for a moment for
Awesome.
people. I just cherry picked something for you that is really a good picture of it, I think. Um, so the last two times that Jupiter was in Gemini, and so you can look back in your own lives and see what was going on then. First, we have from June 2000 to July 2001. And then we have June 2012 to June 2013. And in the world, this was a very important time because there we had two elections. And of course, this election will also occur with Jupiter and Gemini. And just to show you how it can go either way with Jupiter and Gemini, as you've probably already realized, in 2000, which was a real mess of an election
Oh, it's
where
so sad.
uh, Gore had won in one way of looking at it, and Bush had won in another way of looking at it. Supreme Court essentially decided who the president was going to be, and this court had been packed by the new president's father, and
Oh, and
and
maybe his brother and down in Florida
mhm,
had a little something to do with it.
that too.
But
And so that election was with Jupiter retrograde, and we can see that it was an election that was filled with all kinds of confusion and the feeling that something had happened that wasn't supposed to. And then you get and it conservative, right? So it went very conservative with W, and it set up what would turn into the world. I'm not saying that that election caused it, but we were about to enter the world of 9/11, and everything went like south at that point, and it's pretty much continued that way more or less, although we've had a bit of a break from it. And so that time, with that retrograde on that tide election and then fraught with the Supreme Court, you can see echoes of it already. Not saying that that's what happens in this election, but this is one of the things that people are afraid of, that there will be a repeat. And indeed, Jupiter is in Gemini again. But Jupiter was retrograde that year. So this year it isn't. And this is the only time in these elections, the three that we're talking about here, that Jupiter will be direct, I believe.
that's interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so we have the second one, which was the second election of Obama. And although that was a much smoother election, and you had quite the opposite outcome with a landslide victory for the incumbent, it was still a time when there was a crystallization of power among the conservatives, and we had the birth of the Tea Party movement, and we had eventually what would become the Trumpers kind of came out of all of the organizing that happened at that time. And so this is, you see that what occurs is, so we're conservatives in 2000, and we stop Gore because he's got this climate crisis thing and it's crazy, and we won, and this is great. We're gonna and we've got two whole terms, but what happens is a lot of disasters, a lot of weird things are going on, and then there's a period of building in the Democratic Party, and there's new generations who are coming to voting age, and there's older people leaving the voting polls as they die off or become too sick and aged to be able to vote. And then there's this other election that ties the hands of power as the liberals take more control in Congress, and now the W's hands are tied to a degree. Same thing happens to Obama, where he's elected in this wave of reaction against W with a terrible economic crisis going on. But his election is in a very real sense the beginning of what's going to turn into Trump world. And many, many people reacted to his election with this visceral horror of their racist ancestry. And so they organized and continue to organize with great passion. So there's that Gemini thing. You think, wow, we won the election, but really all you did was you elected Obama later. You thought you won the election, but really you elected Trump later.
Right.
And America works in this weird way, this Gemini kind of flip-flop that has been very useful for us as a country because, it's so beautiful. We do horrible things and then we elect a new guy from a different party and we say, "Oh, that was that guy." And we don't do that anymore. This is the good America. And so everybody buys it every time. It's wonderful, just like with Geminis, right? The
Is that
charm
when
is.
was that the Sarah Palin election? That was, right? Or yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely the
So, but you
Trumpers
saw it
need
come.
their
Now look at the
first.
different. You had McCain there. You don't really have that anymore. Like the old school Republican guard. That's pretty much gone now. So it's interesting is that party is in a real traumatic kind of mode of trying to figure out what it's going to be going into the future. It's going to be obviously something different than what it's ever been. And we have discussed the American shadow, the Pluto return, and how powerful it's been, and how Trump, in a sense, has incarnated this shadow so that all of a sudden, at every single dinner table across the country, that's the racist, that's the misogynist. And it became very clear who everybody was.
Yeah.
And so, how does unity happen? Well, it's going to happen because we inspire it to happen, because great works of literature and films and writing and people talking and great acts of charity, and it's going to come from each individual working toward this universal reformation by reforming their own lives and finding ways in their own lives to help to improve the lives of those people around them and to set that good example that can have an amazing ripple effect. And it doesn't really take, if you look at history, and my study of history has shown me that it doesn't even take that many people to get a cultural renaissance rolling. The initial group of people can be a relatively small group, but their passion for their creativity, the way they work together, the way they support each other, those kinds of unmistakable qualities, those are Jupiterian and they bring success to everybody who's involved. And that's where we need to be now.
I love like what you're saying about the inspiration. So it's almost like that 2000 election laid the groundwork and the inspiration for the change and hope campaign of Obama. And then Obama's election during 2012, that 2013 timeframe, that kind of was the inspiration for these Tea Party people who then kind of came out of the woodwork in ways that, we didn't know that they were there, but they banded together in ways that they had not previously. And so that led to Trump. And so it's really interesting that like this new election can be it doesn't feel inspiring, I think, to most people because we have two incredibly old baby boomers. One is just shouldn't be running for president. He's a felon. The other one is really, just a little bit past his prime. It's kind of like it was time to pass the baton. That is not equivalent in my mind. However, the inspiration that, let's say Biden is elected, like you said, like that may be, seeds being planted for a Republican renaissance.
That's the thing. So even if we re-elect Trump in this next election, which I don't think is likely, but if that happens, it's just setting the stage for a reaction, a Pluto in Aquarius reaction with a vengeance. And I suspect that this election, but certainly the next one, is going to reflect the power of women and young people. And I think that power is part of what's going to establish the agenda for Pluto in Aquarius. And very much look forward to that because I think women have already, I mean, if you look at it, just follow the news with an eye on what the women are doing, and you will see how much more civilized our country is and the world is because of women who are doing the right thing.
Yeah. Now, women, I think, are going to have a big voice in this election, and I think that they're not necessarily being represented in the polling in the proportional numbers for which I think they will vote versus some of the other people who may just be turned off by both candidates.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's important to see, maybe this is a good note for finishing a talk about Jupiter and Gemini, and it kind of harkens back to our Korean news, is that how similar many of these two dividing parties are, right? So both sides here have a passionate desire to make America better. Both sides feel passionately that something is very wrong with the country and needs to be fixed because the country in ideal is better than the reality. Both sides really value freedom in the way that they define it. Both sides are very concerned about having the freedom to do what they want to do, but yet enact these restrictions. And it is both sides, because although we may not like the kinds of restrictions that the GOP wants to put into place, progressives also put restrictions into place, and plenty of them that are terrible for people who are trying to exist in their worlds. So this conflict, which is supposed to be a debate that arrives at a compromise, so that we're somewhere in the middle with all this and we move forward, has been frozen because of this demonization of the other side. So now the opposition is stupid, as we have mentioned earlier. The opposition is deliberately doing this out of cruelty, or even more so, they're Satan, or they're reptilians, or they're, each side has, it's a different terminology, but it's the same dysfunction, right? It's not seeing that there's a human being right there who is just as passionate about America being a better place, just as passionate about having a better world to raise a kid in, just as passionate about having freedom and privacy as we are. And so if we can begin to bring that back and not focus so much on the divisions, which social media is optimized to showcase for us, and to shock us with examples of extremes so that we can say, oh my God, you see, there's an example of why the other side is, there isn't one redeeming value for any one of them. They should all be taken out and shot. I mean, I've had people tell me, when we used to tour, when my band used to tour, we never toured with California plates. The first tour we ever did, a good friend of ours, a band who was doing a lot of touring, told us, don't ever use California plates out there.
you get pulled over or
Everything. You get pulled over, you just get tons of problems, bullies and traffic rage. And I mean, California plates was a bad idea.
wow.
And you hear people say all the time that they should kill all the Californians, and that kind of thinking. And in California, they talk about they should kill all the Texans, okay? Or they should saw Florida off the map. There's a lot of great people in those places. And it's funny, the singer in my band, Tamara, we used to tour, and she was always talking about what became the Trump world. She would always say, those are my relatives, okay? I come from like redneck Kentucky, Tennessee type people, and they're out there. They're still there. They're really pissed about how the world has changed. And what they're the most pissed about is that people either don't listen to them at all and pretend they don't exist and just forgot them, or they are actually like calling them stupid and making fun of them.
Right.
And they slowly became a very big problem when they found the perfect candidate. So we got to figure out how to get along. All these people should be getting along. And I saw that can happen. I mean, actually, she was a great example of that, because she had a way, our band, which, we were a punk band, a riot girl band, very political, and we would attract bad attention. But she had a way of flipping these rednecks by being funny and caring about them, and just they would accept her. They would, okay, well, I don't like what you believe, but I like you.
Right.
And once that happens, then you've got progress. And that's what we all need to be thinking, not how do we alienate more people, but how do we find union? How do we follow that great example of those Palestinian and Israeli bereaved parents joining together to stop the conflict that took away their children. That's Jupiter and Gemini at its highest.
Yeah. And Gemini's a trickster. We don't know where it's going to go, but there you can use it to your advantage. Like you said, you can win people over. You can, just remain open-minded to some degree. That doesn't mean you have to accept lies, or that is not what, that means. It means be curious. It means,
Yeah. That
just kind of
be
look
versatile, be
right.
clever, talk to people, be funny, be hospitable, multitask, but be truthful.
Right. Right. Exactly. Like, don't lie, don't gaslight, but be okay with paradox too, that someone isn't
Exactly.
all bad. We're not all bad on one side, we're not all bad on the other side.
Yeah,
We just have some disagreements. So,
exactly.
well,
And
Ronnie, this
always
is
be
awesome.
learning, right? Always be learning. That's the beauty of Jupiter and Gemini. Loves to learn.
Okay, that's a wonderful. Always be learning. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens around the election. I'm glad that it's not in retrograde because no one needs a repeat of 2000.
Check it for me, would you? Make sure that it is, because
Okay.
now
I
I'm
will
like
make a
going,
note down below. If it's in retrograde,
in
then
case I'm wrong.
buckle up.
Well, it's good either way because we did get Obama that one time and we got Bush the other time. So it illustrates that it's up to the collective. Now, I would say maybe that was because of the difference in Pluto positioning, because Pluto was in Sagittarius that first election, and here was Gore saying, look, we got to get ready for this climate problem. It's not grow, grow, grow. And everybody was like, we just want to keep expanding because of
Yeah, we want to have a
Sagittarius.
party. Yeah.
Exactly. And then it shifts to Capricorn, and the next election is completely different thing. So now, since it will be Pluto and Capricorn when this election happens, but after this extended period of Pluto and Aquarius. So it'll be very interesting. It's very much a pivotal election, this and the next one.
Yeah, and I believe that the swearing in of the president, though, it's Pluto and Aquarius.
Yep.
So that's really interesting as well. So
Mhm.
a lot more to talk about the election as we get
Yeah.
closer. But I think that for now, the all we can do, and this is why people say to me, "What do you think? You think he's not going to win?" I say, you know what? I think that it doesn't matter on some level because there is big changes coming no matter what, and I believe you can't fully put the genie back in the bottle anymore.
Yeah.
Our country is no longer what it once was. It is
Mhm.
going to be something different. And I think, we've got some exciting times ahead of us. That's what I think.
Exactly.
So
Let's make it something great.
that's right. And it's up to each and every one of us. That's all we can do.
Exactly. They don't own the word great.
No, or the flag for that matter.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to put some links below so you guys can check out more about Ronnie because he's a really fascinating guy. And I don't know if you guys heard my chicken clucking out there, but he was approving of everything that Ronnie said. Loudly. So anyway, so thank you for your time. And as always, there is a reason and a season for it all. So the universe is conspiring to help us. So go out there and do some really positive Jupiter and Gemini things.